Ever feel like you're just drifting in your career?
Yeah.
Not really in control.
Yeah, like you're not the one steering the ship.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to change that. We're diving deep into managing oneself.
Ah, Peter Drucker. Now that's a classic.
It is. It's this Harvard Business Review article. And it's basically like he's handing you the keys to becoming the CEO of your own life.
Your own work, too.
Exactly. Both. And get this, Drucker says most of us don't even know our own strengths.
Yeah, even like really smart, accomplished people.
It's true. So how do we figure this out?
Well, Drucker has this method he calls feedback analysis.
Okay, feedback analysis. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So it's actually pretty simple. Every time you make like a big decision, write down what you think is going to happen as a result.
Okay, so you're making a prediction.
Yeah, and then 9-12 months later, you look back at your notes and compare them to what actually happened.
So it's like a performance review, but you're reviewing yourself.
Exactly.
I love that. And what's interesting is that even Drucker himself, he used this method.
Yeah, he was always testing his own assumptions.
And he talks about how he discovered this strength in working with technical people, which kind of surprised him.
Yeah, he didn't realize that was one of his strengths until he did this feedback analysis.
That's a great reminder that we can always learn something new about ourselves. So we've got our strengths now. What do we do with them?
Drucker's really clear about this. You focus on them. You don't try to be good at everything. You double down on what you excel at.
So no more spreading ourselves too thin.
Exactly. It's about maximizing your impact, playing to your strength.
I like that analogy. But I do have a question. What about our weaknesses?
Well, you don't ignore them completely, but you don't spend all your time trying to fix them either.
Okay, so it's about prioritizing.
Right, because even if you have some weaknesses, if you're really strong in other areas, that's where you're going to make the biggest difference.
That makes sense. But I'm curious about something else. Drucker has this whole section on manners, which seems a little out of place to me in an article about managing yourself. What's the deal with that?
I know it sounds a little old-fashioned.
Like, who cares about manners anymore?
Well, Drucker actually calls them the lubricating oil of organizations, and I think he's got a point.
Okay, I'm listening.
Even today, with remote work and everything, good manners are still so important for building relationships.
So it's not just about being polite. It's about creating a positive work environment.
Exactly. Like, think about it. Saying please and thank you, acknowledging someone's effort, it goes a long way.
Especially when you're working with people from different backgrounds and with different styles.
Right. It shows respect. It makes things run more smoothly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about strengths and now manners, but Drucker also asks this really interesting question. How do I perform?
Yeah, he's getting at something really important here.
It's not just what you do well, but how you do it best. Right?
Exactly. And Drucker says very few people actually understand how they get things done.
So are you a solo worker?
Mm.
Or do you thrive in a team environment?
Yeah. Are you a big picture thinker or are you more detail oriented?
And it's not about trying to change who you are. It's about understanding your natural style and working with it.
He gives this great example of Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Eisenhower was a reader. He liked to process information in writing. But as president, all the press conferences and meetings really threw him off.
Whereas Johnson was a listener.
Yeah.
But he struggled to absorb information from written reports.
Two very different styles, both successful in their own ways.
That's fascinating. So it's not about trying to fit into some mold. It's about understanding your strength and finding environments that play to them.
And this goes for how we learn, too.
Oh, absolutely. Some people are visual learners. Some are auditory. Some learn best by doing.
Drucker even mentions Beethoven.
The composer.
Yeah, he would furiously scribble down notes, not because he needed to refer to them later, but because the act of writing helped him solidify the music in his mind.
Wow. So even geniuses have their own unique learning styles.
Exactly. And the takeaway is don't try to force yourself to learn in a way that doesn't come naturally.
Work with your strengths, not against them.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered strengths, performance styles, manners. What else is there?
Well, Drucker talks about another really important piece of the puzzle, values.
Values.
So,
What does he mean by that?
values are basically your compass. They guide your decisions and actions.
So like your moral principles?
It's more than just ethics. It's about what's truly important to you, what you stand for.
Okay, so how does this apply to managing yourself?
Well, Drucker says it's about aligning your personal values with the values of the organization you work for.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want to be working for a company that goes against everything you believe in.
He tells the story of a human resources executive who was great at her job, But she ended up quitting because she couldn't reconcile her values with the company's hiring practices.
That's tough. Because you might be really good at something,
Yeah,
but if it clashes with your values, it's not going to be a fulfilling experience.
that's exactly.
So how do we figure out what our values are?
Well, it takes some soul searching. You have to ask yourself some tough questions, like what truly matters to me?
And what am I willing to compromise on?
Hmm.
And what am I absolutely not willing to compromise on?
Right, because if your values and your company's values are constantly at odds, it's going to lead to frustration and burnout.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. So it's important to find an environment where your values are supported and where you can feel good about the work you're doing.
Okay, so we've talked about strengths, performance styles, manners, values. It's like building this multifaceted picture of ourselves.
Right. And once you have that picture, you can start to answer another one of Drucker's key questions. Where do I belong?
Where do I belong?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
It is. And it builds on everything we've talked about so far. Because once you understand your strengths, your work style, your values, you start to see where you fit in and where you don't.
So it's about having the self-awareness to say no to opportunities that aren't a good fit.
Exactly. Even if they seem tempting on the surface.
Like a promotion that you're not actually qualified for.
Or a project that would require you to compromise your values.
It's about being true to yourself and making choices that align with who you are and what you want to achieve.
And on the flip side, when you do find a place where you belong, you can really thrive.
You can make a real contribution.
Because you're not fighting against the current, you're working with it.
I love that. So how do we actually define that contribution? What should we be aiming for?
Well, Drucker says it's about going beyond just doing your job. It's about asking yourself, what should I contribute?
So it's about taking ownership and initiative.
Exactly. It's about identifying areas where you can make a real difference.
And not just for yourself, but for the organization and even for the wider world.
He gives the example of a hospital administrator who transformed the emergency room by setting a clear, measurable goal
And what was that goal?
to have every patient seen by a qualified nurse within 60 seconds of arrival.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It was. But it was also achievable, and it made a huge difference in the quality of care.
So it's about setting goals that are both ambitious and realistic,
Yeah.
and that align with your strengths and with the needs of the situation.
Right. It's about making a tangible impact.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the individual, but we don't exist in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely. We're all
Yeah.
part of a larger ecosystem.
So what about the people around us? How do we manage those relationships?
Well, Drucker says that taking responsibility for relationships is a crucial part of managing oneself.
So it's not just about focusing on ourselves, it's about understanding and working effectively with others.
Exactly. And it starts with recognizing that everyone, just like you, has their own strengths, work styles, and values.
You can't just assume that everyone operates the same way we do.
Right. We have to make an effort to understand where other people are coming from.
It's like learning a new language, the language of personality and work style.
And Drucker gives this funny example of someone who keeps writing these long, detailed reports for their boss who's a listener.
Oh no, that's the recipe for disaster.
It is. And it highlights the importance of understanding how your colleagues work best.
So instead of expecting them to adapt to you, you adapt to them.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to communicate and collaborate effectively.
And he even talks about managing the boss,
Yeah, which can sound a little controversial.
but he doesn't mean manipulating them.
No, it's more about understanding their work style and their preferences and figuring out how to work with them in a way that makes them most effective.
That's actually a really insightful way to think about it. So it's about taking responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the relationships that make our work possible.
And this is especially important in today's world where teams are often dispersed and people are working remotely.
Absolutely. Communication is more important than ever.
So be proactive. Share your own preferences with your colleagues. Ask them about theirs.
Create a culture of transparency and mutual understanding.
Right. Because when everyone's on the same page, it makes everything run more smoothly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground strengths, performance styles, manners, values, relationships.
And we've talked about where we belong and what we should contribute.
But Drucker doesn't just focus on the here and now. He also talks about the long game, the second half of your life.
Ah, yes. That's a really interesting part of the article.
Because it's not like our careers end at 65 anymore.
Right. Especially for knowledge workers, careers are longer and more dynamic than ever before.
So it's almost like we have a whole second act to play out.
And Drucker challenges us to really think about that second act to make it just as fulfilling, if not more so, than the first.
So how do we do that?
Well, he talks about these different paths we can take.
Like starting a new career,
Yeah. Or developing a parallel career alongside your existing one.
or even becoming a social entrepreneur.
Exactly. There are so many possibilities.
But the key is to start thinking about these things early, not waiting until you're burned out or facing a midlife crisis.
Right. It's about being proactive and intentional about shaping your future.
And it ties back to everything we've been talking about.
Because once you know your strengths, your values, how you perform best, you can start to envision what that second half of your life might look like.
You can start to plant the seeds for a fulfilling and impactful next chapter.
And that's a really exciting thought.
It is. It's like we have this incredible opportunity to keep learning, keep growing, and keep contributing long after we've left our traditional careers behind.
And Drucker's insights provide a roadmap for how to do that successfully.
So stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those paths in more detail and talk about how to make the most of that second half of life.
I can't wait.
Me neither. It's going to be fascinating.
It is.
So listeners, be sure to join us for part 2 of our deep dive into managing oneself.
We'll see you then.
Welcome back. You know, as we were talking about all those different paths for the second half of life, it really struck me how much the world of work has changed.
It has, hasn't it?
I mean, even in the last few years. It's not your grandfather's career path anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You know, Drucker actually talked about this shift even back in the late 90s.
Really?
Yeah, he said that the traditional model where companies outlasted careers, that was becoming a thing of the past.
So he saw this coming.
He did. He said that knowledge workers especially, they're much more mobile. They often outlive organizations.
Which means that managing oneself becomes even more important.
Exactly, because you can't just rely on the company to guide your career anymore.
You're the one in the driver's seat.
Right. And Drucker emphasizes that knowledge workers are expected to manage themselves in a way that wasn't really true for manual workers in the past.
It's a whole new ball game.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do we play this new game effectively?
That's the question. What did Drucker say?
Well, he stresses the importance of continuous learning.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because in a knowledge economy, the skills you have today might be obsolete tomorrow.
So you got to constantly be upgrading your skill set.
Exactly. It's about adapting to changing circumstances.
Yeah.
Being willing to learn new things.
It's almost like we're all in perpetual beta mode.
I like that analogy. It's about constantly iterating and improving.
And not being afraid to step outside of your comfort zone.
Right. You have to have a growth mindset. Be willing to embrace new challenges.
So Drucker's insights are still so relevant, even though he wrote this decades ago.
They are. He really understood the fundamental principles of self-management.
Okay, so let's talk about some practical steps our listener can take to become a better self-manager. What are some things we can do starting today?
Well, I think the first step is really investing in self-awareness.
So understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, how you perform best.
Exactly. It's about knowing what makes you tick. What are your passions, your values, your goals?
And Drucker's feedback analysis method is a great tool for this.
It is.
Remind me how that works again.
Sure. So every time you make a major decision, you write down what you expect to happen as a result.
Okay, like what you think the outcome will be.
Right. And then 9 to 12 months later, you look back at your notes and you compare them to what actually happened.
And you can see where your predictions were accurate and where they weren't.
Exactly. And that can give you some really valuable insights into your strengths and weaknesses.
It's almost like you're collecting data on yourself.
That's a great way to put it.
And then you can use that data to make more informed decisions about your career and your life.
Right. You can focus on developing your strengths. You can seek out environments where you're more likely to thrive.
And you can contribute in ways that align with your values.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your own narrative.
I love that.
Yeah.
But we also need to remember that we're not alone in this journey.
Very true.
Drucker talks about the importance of relationships,
He does.
building a strong network of mentors and advisors.
It's like having a personal board of directors for your career.
I like that analogy. People who can offer different perspectives, challenge you to grow.
And help you navigate the inevitable challenges that you'll face along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the most thought-provoking sections of the article,
Okay, which one?
the second half of life.
Yes.
I think a lot of people struggle with this idea, especially in a culture that often equates youth with value.
That's true, but Drucker challenges that notion.
He does. He sees the second half of life as an opportunity for continued growth, contribution, reinvention.
Not a time to just fade away.
Exactly. It's like a whole new chapter to write in the book of your life.
And he encourages us to make that chapter just as compelling, if not more so than the previous ones.
I love that.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure that second half of life is truly fulfilling?
Well, he talks about these different paths we can take.
Like starting a new career.
Yeah. Or developing a parallel career alongside your existing one.
Or even becoming a social entrepreneur.
Exactly. There are so many possibilities.
But the key is to start thinking about these things early.
Right. Don't wait until you're burned out or facing a midlife crisis.
It's about being proactive and intentional about shaping your future.
And it ties back to everything we've been talking about.
Because once you know yourself, your strengths, your values, how you perform best, you could start to envision what that second half of your life might look like.
You can start to plant the seeds for a fulfilling and impactful next chapter.
And that's a really exciting thought.
It is. It's like we have this incredible opportunity to keep learning, keep growing, keep contributing long after we've left our traditional careers behind.
Exactly. And Drucker's insights provide a roadmap for how to do that successfully.
They do.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those paths in more detail
We are.
and talk about how to make the most of that second half of life.
It's going to be fascinating.
I can't wait. So, listeners, be sure to join us for part 3 of our deep dive into managing oneself. Welcome back to our deep dive. It's really striking how Drucker takes this idea of managing yourself and connects it to our responsibility to the world around us.
Yeah, it's not just about personal productivity.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of something bigger.
Exactly. He emphasizes that our actions have ripple effects.
We're all interconnected,
And our choices impact not just ourselves, but our communities.
the world at large.
He says we have a duty to contribute to society.
Leave the world a little better than we found it.
It's like that saying, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
It's a good one. And it's not just about donating money or volunteering.
No, it can be much simpler than that.
Like just being kind to someone,
Exactly. Mentoring a colleague.
supporting a local business.
Right. Every little action can make a difference.
It's about being mindful and trying to make the world a better place.
Drucker really challenges us to think about our place in the grand scheme of things.
And his message is so relevant today, especially with all the challenges we're facing.
It's true. Climate change, social inequality.
It can feel really overwhelming.
But Drucker reminds us that we each have the power to make a difference.
So how do we do that? How do we find that balance between managing ourselves and contributing to something bigger?
Well, he says we need to identify our strengths and passions.
And then find ways to use them to make a positive impact.
Right. Whether it's through our work, our volunteer activities, or just our daily interactions.
It's about finding that sweet spot where our passions and the needs of the world intersect.
Exactly.
And sometimes that means stepping outside our comfort zones,
It does.
taking risks, challenging the status quo,
Advocating for what we believe in.
because we have a responsibility to use our voices to make a difference.
And it doesn't have to be this big grand thing.
Right. It can start with small acts of kindness.
Compassion, courage.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that managing oneself is not just about techniques or strategies.
It's bigger than that.
It's a philosophy of life.
It's about aligning our actions with our values.
And striving to make a positive contribution to the world.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own destinies
And to create a better future.
for ourselves and for generations to come.
Yeah.
It's a call to action to live with intention and purpose.
Beautifully said.
And listeners, remember, the world needs your unique talents and contributions. So go out there and make them. That's it for this deep dive into managing oneself. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep managing yourselves.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Better Every Day. We hope you found some actionable insights to help you on your self-improvement journey. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on future deep dives. And if you're on YouTube, hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, small steps every day lead to big changes. See you next time.